Pattern brushes are some of the most complex brushes to work with, but if you know what you're doing, they're really, really cool. So a pattern brush allows you to repeat the same pattern over and over again along the length of a vector line that you've created. In this case, we're going to create a repeating chain link pattern that we can paint anywhere that we want to. I've gone ahead and loaded up some predefined pattern brushes just to show you what they look like. If I grab my paintbrush tool, select one of these patterns, and you can see in one click, it will repeat that pattern over and over. Let's make it bigger so we can see it. Here's the pattern. It's not being stretched. It's actually redrawn in segments across the length of this particular line. I can choose any type of object and make a pattern from it. However, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Let's look at the chain link that we want to create. In this case, if I wanted to copy this link over and over again, well, if I used just this and I copied it again, this is what it would start to look like. That's not exactly what I want. I want there to be a link in between each one of them. So when you create a repeating pattern, you need to find what exactly needs to be repeating. In this case, it's really this center part. If I was to split the link from here and here, as I've actually previously done, this center part is what's repeating over and over again. So let's move these out of the way and see what happens if I copy this. Now it's starting to look more like a true link. Notice that what's on one side needs to line up with what's on the other side. That's another thing to pay attention to when creating your own repeating patterns. Do the sides match up with one another? In this case, I've kept it simple, and they do. The next thing I need to know is how do they start and how do they end? In this case, I know that this rounded link is one end, so we'll deal with that in just a second. But let's deal with the repeating center pattern first. So I'm going to delete these away, and I've gone ahead and broken up our link into different segments, and we'll deal with each segment as it comes along. Here's the first segment that we're going to work with. Be careful not to scale it. But I've got it pulled up and selected. I'm going to open my Swatches palette. Here's the next thing you got to know about making a pattern brush. We need to define this object as a swatch pattern. So with this, I've got it selected. I'm just going to drag it into my swatches. And when I let go, you can see there it is. It's saved as a swatch in itself. That's pretty cool. Now let's see what we can do with it. And we'll keep my swatches open. Let's go to my brushes palette and choose to create a new brush. In this case, it's going to be a pattern brush. We'll say OK. Here are the options for it. In our brush pattern options, you can see I can change the scale of it. I can give it a new name. I can also choose the different segment parts for each of the brush. Let's have a look at each of the segments. If I zoom in, you kind of get a preview of what each area is looking at. So this first one deals with the straight edge of the segment, and that's what this new swatch that we created was. With it selected, notice I've got original, but if I have some other type of pattern saved, such as this foliage, I could change it up to that one. Or here's our new pattern swatch that we created for this one. For now, we're only going to keep and worry about this straight edge segment. Later on, we'll add the other ones, such as a right angle turn or a left angle turn, or a beginning or an ending point for it. Also notice on these brush options, you can flip things, you can stretch it or add space to fix it, and you can also change up the colorization mode. In our case, we do want to change this, so we'll change this to hue shift, and we'll say OK. Now let's test out our brush. If you look at the bottom of our brushes palette, this is what it looks like, and it gives you a preview kind of how it would work. If I was to select my paintbrush, whoops, now let's start painting. And there it is, repeating itself over and over and over again. So it's working out really, really good. If there's any problems with it, this is where you may want to go back and tweak and then resave your swatch that you have. Notice that when it reaches an edge, it will distort the image in order to get it to fit nice and even within it. However, there's a problem. Let's see if we can apply this to a squared edge. Drawn off my square. If I click on the brush now and apply it, you can see it doesn't work very well if I've got a straight 90-degree angle edge to it. In other words, there's nothing for it to be there, so it's not going to warp it, it's just going to leave it blank. Now if this happens, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, you could just maybe make your objects not have any angled corners, just go ahead and round off those corners. Or we can define those corner edges. And that's where these other little objects that I'm giving you come into handy. If you scroll down, you can see what each of the objects are going to be. In this case, it's going to be a right-hand turn, a left-hand turn, and even a start and a stop option for this one. If you pay close attention, the left and the right-hand turn are different, even though they look the same. You can see one is on top of the other, and the other is not. So let's define a swatch for each one of these different things. So I've got it selected. Drag it into my swatches, and there's that one. We'll select this one, drag it in there. There's another swatch. And do the same for our end swatches. In this case, I'm going to have it end with a mace. And there is that as well. So with each one defined, now let's double click on our brush and edit it. So I've got my pattern options. Notice now I've got new patterns for each one. So in this case, I'm going to click on my right-hand turn, and we'll make that swatch 2. My left-hand turn will be swatch 3, and my beginning will be swatch 4, and my end is swatch 5. If you make your own custom brushes, this is where playing around and making different starts and stops comes in handy. But I do recommend making the entire length of the pattern you want to repeat first, then cutting it up and making the individual swatches. So we'll say OK. Now let's test out our new brush that we have. Grab my brush tool, set my fill color to none, and paint along with it. That's pretty cool. Notice that the end of it is finished off, and the end of this one is also has my little mace on it, but it is a little bit distorted. I'm going to zoom out. Let's go and find an empty area and drag a long area to it. So there's that. From start to finish, I've got a repeating pattern that starts with one end, repeats the same pattern all throughout the edges, and then ends with the mace on that side. Let's apply it to a corner piece and see how my corners work. Make a square, apply that, and now you can see my ends will also link up, or excuse me, my corners will link up in themselves as well. If I wanted to, I could make this a lot smaller. So instead of 1 point, here it is at half the size. Here's the same thing for this one at a smaller size as well, and that works out good too. So for this particular exercise, you're going to create a pattern brush from the links that I have below. If you really want to get creative, make your own pattern brush and see how they repeat over and over again as well.